Hello. Today we're going to be talking about metaphor, simile, and analogy, and the difference between these three things. Now, most of you have probably studied the difference between metaphor and simile, and you've probably been told that a simile is simply a metaphor that uses like or as. And that's true. A simile is a type of metaphor, but we can go further into depth with this when we bring in the idea of analogy. But before we start to talk about analogy, let's review the idea of simile and metaphor. Now, the classic example of simile and metaphor that I hear all the time is golden hair. I don't know if we have like a Rapunzel thing or whatever, but this is the classic example. So you have, her hair was golden. Her hair was golden. Was her hair literally golden? Like, was it made out of gold? No. But did her hair shine like gold? Did she have beautiful blonde hair? Yes, her hair was golden. This is a metaphor. You are claiming that her hair is something that it is not in order to enhance how beautifully blonde this particular woman's hair was. You can create essentially the same sentence with a simile. Her hair was like gold. Her hair was like gold. Or her hair shone as gold. Her hair shone as gold. So in this case, you are not claiming that her hair was gold, but you are saying her hair was like gold. It is a simile. It is still a type of metaphor because you are comparing her hair and the gold together in order to create a picture in your reader's mind over how beautifully golden this particular woman's hair was. And it's pretty straightforward. You have your metaphor, her hair was golden, and you have your simile, her hair shone like gold. You're creating a description, you're creating a picture in your reader's mind to show what type of hair that particular woman had. We'll say Rapunzel because this is the example that is most prominent in my mind. Okay, now let's ramp it up a bit and get a little more complicated, and let's talk about analogy. Now, an analogy wants to start in the same place that a simile and a metaphor wants to start. It wants to start by describing an idea, describing something, okay? But then an analogy will take it a step further. An analogy will say, here is what I am describing, and here is also why I am describing it, or here is also why it is significant and important. So an analogy will generally describe and then explain whatever it is that it is describing and explaining. So let's take all that abstract nonsense and look at a real example. And who better to turn to than Shakespeare, the king of analogies? I don't know. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. We'll say he was the king of analogies because, you know. So let's look at one of my favorite analogies. It's dark, it's a little bit depressing, but it's beautiful. So we're gonna turn to Macbeth.
Okay, so we've talked about metaphor. Just to remind you, here is a metaphor. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair. Except for it was probably more like Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair. Or if it was a prince, it would be in a princely voice, which I can't do. And we've talked about simile, which is simply a type of metaphor. Her hair shone like gold. Her hair shone as if made of gold. There you have the like, and you have the as. So, what about analogy? Well, let's get cracking. Okay, so here we have a quote from William Shakespeare's Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 5, lines 24 through 28, if you would like to look it up on your own. And it is the final moment of the story, really. If you haven't read it, it doesn't give much away in the plot, so you should be fine. But I suppose, to be fair, spoiler warning. Okay, let's look at this quote. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Okay, I don't have a Shakespearean actor voice, so sorry about that, but I did my best. Let's talk about how this is an analogy. In the first place, just like we talked about, an analogy can contain a metaphor or a simile. So we have this life's but a walking shadow. Life is a walking shadow. That is a metaphor. If we were to change that word but into like or as, you would have a simile. Life's as a walking shadow. Life's like a walking shadow. Our lives are like walking shadows. And there we have a really beautiful metaphor of our life as kind of like a ghostly figure, a shadow, not fully actualized. All right. And then it continues, the analogy continues, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Okay, so our life is like this shadow that struts and frets for the duration of his life upon the stage and then is heard no more, meaning he dies. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Life is meaningless. What a happy thought. So, in this case, the analogy has done exactly what we said it would do. It started with a metaphor, or a simile, if you were to change one word. So it started with a metaphor, and then it extrapolated that metaphor and explained what it meant. Life's like a walking shadow. Yeah, what do you mean by that, dude? Shakespeare, what do you mean? Well, first of all, you run around on the stage, fretting and strutting about, and then you die. It's a tale, it's a story told by an idiot. It's full of sound and fury, and it means nothing. Thank you, Shakespeare. This was lovely. Let's do this again. It's been a real joy. But in all seriousness, this is one of my favorite quotes from Shakespeare, from one of my favorite plays. It is extremely sad, but I think that it is poignant for our lives even today. And one of the things I love about this particular passage is that it is so easy to read. You don't really have to translate it like you do with other bits of Shakespeare. This one is actually quite clear. Life is meaningless. Now, whether or not you agree with that is a completely different question, but at least I have to admit that it is beautifully written. So, there you have an analogy, starting with a metaphor, but then explaining and extrapolating what that metaphor actually means and its implications for us as humans, meaning life is meaningless.
The quick version of the video is this. 1. A metaphor is a description which compares two unlike things. 2. A simile is a type of metaphor which uses like or as. And 3. An analogy is a descriptive piece of writing, often employing the use of metaphor and simile, which then goes on to explain the meaning of what it is saying. All right, I hope that was helpful. See y'all later. Bye.